here's the reality. Again, there are people who are upset with the outcome of an election. Dominion, let's start with the full timeline again. In 2019, the legislature passed a bill that required BMDs, a ballot marking device, to be the machine of choice for the state, regardless of vendor. I think the day after the legislature passed it, after both houses passed it, we released an RFP that the office has been working on essentially since before the secretary was sworn in. That RFP process followed the Georgia procurement law, and we worked in coordination with the Department of Administrative Services. There were 3 bidders. There were potentially 4. One bidder, Hart InterCivic, missed the deadline by, I don't know, they had uploaded stuff, they didn't hit the final upload, so they were cut off out of the gate. Then you had ES&S, which was the incumbent vendor who had taken over the old Diebold machines. You had Dominion, and then you had another one called Smartmatic that partnered with another company whose name escapes me now because this has been over a year ago. So we went through a process, and they were scored. There was 32 main questions, and I want to say there's something like 250 or so sub-questions from that were all scored by a group of individuals. There were 7 people on the committee, and they were not just Secretary of State. In fact, I think there was only 2 from Secretary of State's office, but we had a disability advocate there. We had 2 elections directors on there. We had, a security expert from the Georgia Technology Authority. So we had a multi-faceted group of people doing these evaluations. So all 3 people did their written bids, then all 3 of them came in and did in-person demonstrations. From those, the initial scoring came in. The ES&S was number 1 in technical, but they were bad on pricing, and Dominion was best on pricing and just a little behind ES&S on technical. So then we moved into a negotiation phase with both ES&S and Dominion. And there's a lot of security questions throughout all of this thing, and so everybody answered those things equally. And we put price down at only 25% of the overall amount, so that was only part of it. And it was a smaller part, because we were trying to say, what are you balancing off on this for the taxpayers versus what you're getting on the value side? So at the end of the day, they had their initial bids, and all of this is available on the Department of Administrative Services website. It's all public and transparent. You can see the initial bids, you can see the contract. It's all there in black and white. It has been there since we signed the contract, which was in the summer of 2019. So Dominion, both ES&S and Dominion lowered their prices a lot. So we did a good job protecting the taxpayers on that front. But Dominion still came out ahead. So Dominion, following our procurement law, was the one that was chosen. And if you remember at the time, there was a lot of, some of these same people who are complaining now are complaining that, the bid is being rigged for ES&S because there are people who Kemp knew who used to do that, even though Kemp's office had 0 to do with this. None, 0, nada, zilch. So we chose Dominion, we executed the contract, and we started doing something that nobody said we could do. We got all the equipment out from the initial order by Valentine's Day of 2020. That was our first big lift that we did. So we got those out the door, and the Dominion system, anything with a computer has quote-unquote vulnerabilities. The ridiculous things claimed in some of these lawsuits are just that. They're insanity. It's fever dream, made up, internet cabal. I can't, however many words I can use to say how crazy some of these things are. Nothing was shipped overseas. No votes were switched. We did a hand audit that proved no votes were switched. I mean, that in and of itself should have been enough to make people understand that. So the idea that there was a machine flipping votes didn't happen. So once that's out of the way, then they shift gears on some of these things to talk about the system itself, but there's no proof of Dominion's system having any flaws like that. The situation in Texas that some people have related back to this was they literally had a light they wanted to plug in to an open USB port so a voter could press a button to ask for help. And they said, well, that's an open USB port. That's a security risk. We don't have that issue in ours because we don't have that. All of our stuff is sealed and taped in and not accessible on those fronts. I said the other day, it's like playing a game of whack-a-mole. Every time we knock down one, there's a new crazier one. So we are doing our best to be transparent and answer all these charges because there are people out there who people respect and are believing some of these things. And it's difficult and it's frustrating, and I'm sure y'all can see that from my own tone of voice on this. But Doug, does that kind of get you to the answer?
You gave a good answer to a question I don't think I asked.
You did. You said Dominion Security, which I went right into.
But just briefly, you said that all computer systems have, arguably have vulnerabilities. This raised questions about whether states, not just Georgia, ought to be rethinking the extent to which they use
No, I mean, you can mitigate all these things. It's always going to be that way because if, let's say we go to the Luddite version and you do hand-marked, hand paper, hand counting, we would still be counting. It's an insane thing. We're a nation of 300 million people. And you have to have systems in place. And actually, these systems provide extra guardrails and extra checks to make sure that everything is being done properly. Imagine going to your bank and saying, I only want to do things with checks and cash now. You couldn't do it. I mean, we don't live in that kind of society. And there's nobody has shown any actual real vulnerabilities that have ever been exploited. And I'll quote Chris Krebs and say, this is the most secure election in the history of the United States. And I can guarantee you this is the most secure election in the history of the state of Georgia. Are there going to be bad actors? Are there going to be mistakes? Are there going to be people who try to exploit issues sometimes? Absolutely. That's why we investigate double voters. That's why we investigate potentially dead voters. That's why we investigate people trying to illegally register things. But nearly every single one of those has zero to do with the system and 100% to do with individuals trying to game the system. And it always comes down to that.